Welcome back to the podcast. Today I have my amazing friend Ron Angel, who is a fellow entrepreneur, and he is back. So if you don't know this about Ron, he's actually been working pretty diligently to help get this podcast out. I've been working with him on this project. And so behind the scenes, we do a lot of talking about topics and formatting and things like that. And a topic came up between us where I thought it would be really cool to discuss life-altering events. So today we have Ron, and that is going to be our topic of discussion. Welcome back, Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. Awesome to be on with you again. So it looks like today I'm going to be interviewing you, right?
Yeah, man, that sounds great. I am cool with it.
Awesome. So there's, we talked about this life-altering event. This happened, I don't know how many months ago. It feels like forever. But, before we get into it, I'll say I don't know too much of the details of what led up to it or what it was like during, before, during, and after. And so I'm really curious to find out some of those, some of that information, as well as the lessons learned, throughout that process and afterwards. So if it's okay with you, why don't we kind of start off setting the scene and tell me, what was life, what was going on in your life around the time of this event, and what was the event? What actually happened?
Yeah, for sure. So it was summer of 2023. So June-ish, July, no, it was July, I think, late June, July. I got a very serious bacterial infection known as necrotizing fasciitis, also known as flesh-eating disease. And so in preparation for this, I was actually pulling some stats, and I'm sure there's some statisticians out there that can nail me really hard on these, so go easy. But here's what I pulled, okay? Just to give you an idea, necrotizing fasciitis is known as like a very rare disease or bacterial infection. So like very rare, right? If you think about the population in the United States, there are roughly 345 million people, somewhere around there, okay? Out of those people, on any given year, there is roughly 700 to 1,200 cases in the United States of necrotizing fasciitis, okay? So if you're doing the math here, it's like a very, very small amount. To put it into perspective, over that same period, statistically, within the United States, 25,000 people are going to lose an arm. Not a limb, very specifically an arm, right? So there's a 20x difference. 20x difference there. So you're 20 times more likely to lose an arm than get necrotizing fasciitis is sort of how I think about it. Out of those people that get it, 1 in 5 are a fatality, or that's the mortality rate, right? So 1 in 5 people die. It's like a very serious thing. So going back to that time, I already had some other health issues. I'd been going through a hip issue. I think you probably remember this. But long story short, I had a hip issue that got pretty bad over time. I didn't really take care of it like I should. Like most athletes, I just kind of pushed through. And then I had a significant event that kind of set a chain reaction of other things off in my hip. That led to a pretty serious surgery. And so I was actually post-op. I asked my wife this morning, I thought I was 5 weeks post-op, but I actually asked Shelby this morning. She said we were only 3 weeks post-op. So I was 3 weeks post-op. So I had been already sort of off my feet. I was still working. I worked from home. I wasn't like going out and inspecting properties and things like that. But, I was still doing the real estate stuff, still helping out with our cleaning company. And I was sort of just recovering from home. I was on that road to recovery. And when this all happened, and hindsight's always 20/20, but it really was one of those like out of the blue things, because I'm like, people had already been sending me like, really kind notes and like, hey, I'm thinking about you. Hey, we know you're going through this thing, and that surgery, it was planned, right? So it wasn't like, I didn't like get in a car crash and they had to operate on my hip. It was like things were getting progressively worse and worse, and I just kind of hit that point. So we scheduled it, went into the orthopedic surgeon, that sort of thing. But if that kind of frames it for you.
So interestingly, I sort of thought that this infection was related to that surgery. Like maybe you got some sort of infection in the hospital. It sounds like not. It sounds like you were already kind of recovering at home. So how did this infection occur? Like what actually led to this?
Yeah, dude, that's a really good question. And my perception sort of changed over time. You know, in hindsight, one of the amazing things about this was because I was post-op, when I went into the ER, it actually was pretty quick. Like, I mean, we'll talk about it. That was a whole different story. But like they were kind of by the book just because I was post-op. And that's like the SOP, right? Because when you get a surgery, that's one of the biggest things. And they'll tell you when you get any surgery, like, hey, risk of infection. That's always the biggest thing. So they were kind of like on the lookout. Now, whether that was connected or not, I don't know. I kind of have my theories. Here's what I do know. I was post-op, okay? I was laid up. I was laying on the couch. And what I remember is during this time, I'd been laying on this. It wasn't like a recliner. It was just a chair, a chair with normal, fabric on it, whatever. The fabric is sort of mildly abrasive. And I kept getting in and out of this chair using my elbows because my leg was kind of jacked up, right? And so I'd kind of like use my elbows and scoot to the end, and then I'd push myself up. So I remember my elbows were kind of like chafed, and like I remember complaining about that. Well, simultaneously, I had some family out to see me, and we went to a lake. And so we're out at this lake, and I'm just laying on the beach, and I got 2 young kids, got a pregnant wife. They're having a good old time, and I decided to get in the water. And I was 3 weeks post-op, and I don't think there was any real visible wound still, but maybe there was. I mean, in hindsight, honestly, if there was, like, I was so dumb to get in that water. But I probably did, honestly, whether there was or wasn't. Like, I don't think I really thought too much about it. So I get in the water, I'm swimming in this lake. And, since this incident happened, like probably like 6 months later, I was spending time speaking to people, an infectious disease doctor. And then oddly enough, there's another person who I have a connection to who has a husband that went through the same thing. And there's some evidence out there that's like you can get the same strand of strep that I got. It's a certain strand of strep. That's the bacteria from swimming. So there's a likelihood that I got it from swimming. And then there's also this idea that I was post-op. So my body had this trauma that it was recovering from. My immune system was suppressed. So, if I had to guess, it was maybe like a culmination of all these events. But like when I talked with the Vanderbilt infectious disease doctor, he's like, man, I've been doing this for a long time. Like I've seen more cases of this than most people. It's like, he's like, I don't even give it 2 thoughts. Like the standard MO is like, nobody really knows. Like they don't know. They don't know what they did or they didn't do. And so he's like, it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't really matter. You got it. And so like, it's such a serious thing. Everybody just focuses on combating it. And so, yeah, man. So I don't know if that answered your question there, but that's sort of my theory.
I mean, it doesn't. It sounds like it's still a mystery and nobody really knows. You don't even have a good sense. I mean, you have some theories, but nothing concrete. So that in itself is very interesting. So, okay. So when did you know that you were in trouble? Like how did you know you had this infection? Yeah. How did you end up in the hospital?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fast forward to like going to the lake, all that sort of stuff. I want to say it was within a day or days. It was like very quickly. Again, hindsight's 2020. So it appeared that there was nothing that led up to this. And this is how I remember the story, right? I remember the night before I went to bed, before I went into the ER room, I remember laughing with my wife because I was like, babe, my skin is like so dry on my elbow. That is so weird. And I just remember there was no swelling, there was no redness, there's no pain, no nothing. I just remember like putting lotion on it, and we kind of were like joking because it was like so dry. Next thing I know, I'm waking up, tossing and turning with a severe pain. Got progressively worse. Like, I mean, we're talking like minutes and hours. And it was enough to where if you ever slept in a wrong position, like your arms like pent up or your knees tweaked and you just like have this crazy pain, but then the moment that you straighten it out and you kind of reset, like you get that relief. I don't know. Have you ever had anything like that?
Yeah, for sure.
So that's what I thought it was. And when I got up, my first thought was, this is really funny. I have a fever in my elbow. As a matter of fact, I got up and I was like, what is going on? And it was very hot. It was like very painful. So this is where I got necrotizing fasciitis down my arm. Like, I don't know if you can, on the video, those watching the video, you may or may not be able to see some of the scarring on there, right? Yeah. So I get up, I get out of bed, and I, as the pain is getting worse, it also felt like I had been ran over by like a Mack truck. Like I had no energy, no like sort of stamina, no nothing. And, but I couldn't lay in bed. And so I'm just getting up, moving around. And finally my wife woke up and she's like, what's going on? And I was like, babe, I got a fever in my elbow. And I still remember her voice. She goes, you got a fever in your elbow. And she tells me, she's like, dude, I thought you were so ridiculous. I was like, what are you talking about? And I was just like, yeah, babe, I'm going downstairs. This is like 4 a.m. So I make my way downstairs, and like, as I'm doing this, dude, the pain is getting worse and worse and worse. And I try to sit on the couch there, and I'm just so uncomfortable. And then agitation sets in. I can't watch TV. I try to turn the TV on. Like what I'm trying to do here is like shift my focus, right? Because the pain was so bad. But I was so focused on trying to combat the pain that I wasn't doing anything else. And then I had this thought, oh man, what if I got COVID? This must be what COVID thinks like, or feels like, right? And so I kind of chilled out, and I don't know. I've always been one of those people that sort of conceals what's going on, like pain wise, you know, and I'm like, man, Devin, you're overreacting. It's okay. I started having like this deep hunger, but yet I couldn't eat. I felt like I was going to throw up. So I remember like getting a protein bar, and it's like, you know, it's 4 a.m, lights are out, and I'm like sitting in the living room in the darkness, eating a protein bar on the edge of the chair. And I'm just in so much pain. And I finally get up to start walking around. And I guess the moment for me that like I knew something was wrong was I was standing in my kitchen by my stove, and I was praying, and I had this thought, like, I just want to die, like literally. And I realized, I was like, dude, something is wrong. Because it's like, you know, it's a wrong thought, but it's a thought that you're conceding to. And I was like, I want to die. And so it was at that point, I don't know if I called Shelby because I had my phone, or I like hollered up the stairs, but I was like, it was maybe like 6:30 a.m. I was like, babe, like we got to go. Like I need to go to the ER. And you know, she had fallen back asleep. Last thing she remembers is, dude, Devin's got a fever in his elbow. And she's like, okay. And I'm not going to lie, she may or may not have taken me too serious at that time. I guess, you know, rightfully so. I was sort of concealing it. And so I mostly meant like, because things were progressing so fast for me, I mostly, for the most part, meant like, let's get in the car and go now. And she's like, okay. She starts getting the kids ready, getting them up for school. And I didn't say a thing to her, but I remember in my head thinking, this woman is crazy. So she gets the kids ready, puts them in the car, and I remember sitting in the car, head down like this, because I was like focused. I was like focused on breathing, focused on like trying to like relax, because the pain was so intense. And when I say pain, like I just, it's very hard to describe. Obviously, my elbow was swollen at this point, somewhat, and it was kind of flushing red, but it was like my entire body felt weak. It felt like it radiated. Like it was the oddest thing. And it's something I'd never felt before. Like I've had some pain in my life. I don't know if I have a high tolerance for pain or not. Like what I will say is I've experienced some things like, you know, compound fractures, things like that, where people are like, no, like that's something that's generally a 10 for people. And so, you know, you're doing pretty stinking good. And this is, you know, from my memory, the worst pain I've ever felt, you know? So anyways, I'm in there and I'm just like head down, and think Shelby's going left to the ER. Like I haven't said a word to her, but I still have hope. She bangs a right. And I'm like, well, we're going to school. So we go to school and drop the kids off. And then she takes me to the ER. And I think like, you know, she's trying to talk with me, but she's also trying to like, she's sort of like picking up urgency. And yeah, dude. So finally we get to the ER and like by that time she had seen that it was a little swollen. And I just remember telling her like, hey, make sure you tell him I'm post-op. And because, you know, even for me, I was like, does this have anything to do with my hip? Because I'm still in recovery, you know, like I'm not thinking bacterial infection. I'm not even thinking infection. I mean, part of the reason this threw us off was because like the symptoms, like I literally felt like normal Devin, except for I couldn't walk the night before. And then all of a sudden I'm like on, you know, figuratively speaking, on my knees, like wanting to die, like no like blunt trauma, no, like it was just the oddest thing. Right. So we tell them that and they rush us back and dude, that was a whole thing in and of itself. I think that, you know, thank God for the professional people in this world. You know, anywhere you go, there's going to be good people. There's going to be not so good people. And our doctor back there was not very good, but there was this vet, he was a 68 whiskey, and man, I love people like him. He was sharing with me like how he felt about being a nurse. So he was a nurse and he was just like, you could tell he was so passionate about his level of care. Like that's all he cared about. And so, you know, he really helped keep me kind of calm, but like one of the doctors said, watch, he's got strep. It's going to be strep. Actually to the point where Shelby was like a little offended because Shelby's like, there's one thing I know my husband, and like usually when things are pretty serious, he doesn't think they're serious. So like if he thinks they're serious, like there might be a thing. And I remember when everybody shut up was I started vomiting and I couldn't control it. And then I started shitting on myself. And I think at that point, that's when everybody was like, oh, and even Shelby, you know, she was like right there with me. 'Cause the first time I was trying to make it to the bathroom, but I couldn't, you know, because they got a little bathroom in the little triage room. Because I was still in triage at this point. And because they don't really want to do anything until they sort of have an idea on treatment plan. And dude, they were like, get them in the ambulance and like get them to higher level care. And so then from there, I think I went straight to the ICU over at the hospital and, you know, started a whole nother journey over there.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like all that happened really, really fast. All right. So, you know, you guys got up, you took the kids to school first. And then what clinic did you go to? Is like a local clinic and then you had to be rediverted to a major hospital? Yeah. Yeah.
So like, where we live out here, first off, to give you an idea of time, like, and this is the best of my memory, I remember waking up around 4. I remember about 6:30, Shelby waking up. That's when I got her attention. And then I think about 8 a.m. is when I got into the ICU at the other hospital. So where we live, there's like an ER, like it's, you know, that's all it is emergency room. And so she drove us straight there. I mean, it's, and this is why I laughed. I said, she went left when we should have went right, or she went right when we should have went left, whatever. My point in saying that was like, there's a main road and to the left is to the school, which is actually further than the ER. The ER is like, I don't know, 1 or 2 stoplights to the right. And so that's why I was kind of chuckling there, but it's really close. Got into there. And then, yeah, like I said, I got into triage and then they put me in an ambulance and took me to the hospital, which, you know, the hospital's another, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes away. It is pretty close too. It's just like, you know, a few miles down the road.
Got it. Okay. So they get you to the hospital, they put you in the ICU. What happens next? Are you even still conscious at this point? Or is it like,
yeah,
where are you mentally, physically right now?
Yeah, dude. So at this point, pain has sustained itself. Mentally, honestly, I had a little bit of relief because I was like, well, at least they're going to figure it out. That was my thought. I wasn't really thinking in the terms of like, you know, am I going to survive or not? Like, honestly, hadn't really clicked at that point. Like, I was really worried to figure out what was going on. But for the most part, I was like, at least somebody's like looking, like the, you know, first step is awareness, right? So like the fact that somebody's even willing to consider, because I felt like, dude, maybe it was minutes, but it felt like a huge hump we got over, because I go into the ER and, they're like, oh yeah, he's got strep throat or this. And I'm like, no, buddy, like, and we need to figure this out. Like, you know what I'm saying? And oddly enough, the thought of necrotizing fasciitis had never crossed my mind, but I was familiar with it. There's people that have like never even heard of the thing before. They're like, flesh-eating disease, there's a thing. Yeah. It's like, yeah, dude, there's a thing. I had actually heard about it before, so when later down the road, when the infectious disease doctor like had started talking about that, I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, first thing I said, I was like, isn't that like extremely rare? He's like, uh-huh. I'm like, oh, okay. So anyway, I get into I'm pretty sure it's the ICU. I was in various levels of care. Man, I think it was like, they put me up like on the lowest level of care first. Then I went down to the ICU. Then I went to the step down, I think is what happened. So, either way, that was a rigmarole in and of itself. But like the first, I get into the hospital, like I'm in this bed and like, I'm still fairly lucid. I'm just in a lot of pain. Like, to give you an idea, like I remember this other moment where I was kind of fed up with the ER, but I kind of carried that into the hospital, and there was this really young nurse in there, and they were supposed to give me, she was just trying to get a bag started on me, because that was what she was supposed to do. And dude, she could not hit my vein for nothing. And I just remember like I could barely hold my right arm straight. She tried and tried and tried. And where I got frustrated was she blew the vein out. And then she kept trying. She's like, oh, I'll just go above it. And like, then it happened a second time. And she was going to let it happen a third. And dude, I stopped it. And I was like, hey, I don't mean this disrespectfully. And I kind of had a tone, because it's like, you should know better, right? Yeah. But I was like, we need to go get somebody else. And she's like, well, I've done this several times. And I was like, I made some smart ass comment, which in hindsight probably wasn't the nicest thing. But I was like, so have I, but that doesn't qualify me to give this right now. Like, like I was kind of like, just like listen to me, like, trying to be firm. And she got it. And so thankfully the next nurse came in. She didn't even try to hit that. They did I can't remember what it's called, but like a more permanent IV where they go like into like one of the, I don't know if it's main artery or whatever, but do you know what I'm talking? I can't remember what they call that. I want to say
it's called a central line or something like that. My wife's a nurse. She's an ICU nurse. I think she's mentioned stuff like that before.
Yeah, there's some slang term for it, right? And I remember her saying, hey, we're going to do what? And I was like, what's that? And she reminded me, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And so, yeah, they did that. But I say that because that was like one of the things that I remember. And that's kind of one of the last things I remember until like there's sort of these moments where I'm like in it, I'm out of it. And like I remember thinking these thoughts. And then I got really heavy. Like they had me on a lot of narcotics. Like I had Darvocet, I had fentanyl, and then they had me taking like in between these, they're pumping me full of they had me like on a drip line, right? In between those, they had me taking like pill form hydrocodone, so like, dude, I had a ton of stuff. So those moments are a little bit hazy, but I do remember I started hallucinating. This was before the narcotics, because again, they're just still trying to assess and figure out what's going on. They can't just start doing things. You know what I'm saying? And one of the things was, I don't know if the idea of necrotizing fasciitis was like on any doctor's radar, because I had several doctors. Okay. I had the hospital doctor come see me. I had the doctor on the floor, which was like the step down at that time. And then I had an infectious disease doctor from Vanderbilt, which he just did rounds at that hospital. And thank God he was getting ready to do his rounds. He was like 30 minutes away or something like that. So I think they kind of anticipated that, and that was part of it. But things are progressively getting worse. My pain, my arm is swelling. So now at this point, there's this big redness and they start tracing it, right? like as you do with a bug bite or something like that, where you want to see, is it getting bigger, is it spreading, or is it going away? And so they started tracing the red line, and dude, that bad boy's just growing. Like we're talking like minutes, you know? And so I think that was also one of the things where they were like, oh man, yeah, this is pretty bad. But I still couldn't get any relief. And so I'm sweating and I start hallucinating. They're moving me around because they're still waiting. You know, after this point, I end up getting CT, MRI, multiple CTs, multiple MRIs. And so they're wheeling me like all around, back and forth. You know, I get into this one room, they start me with that IV. Then they're like, oh, we need to move him. I think it was the ICU. And then I get down there and then they're like, well, he can, you know, I think maybe I got some MRIs and some CAT scans. And they're like, well, let's put him back in step down. And then I went into surgery and like, so there's just a lot of moving around. But before that part, as they're taking me down to from the first unit I was at, dude, I don't know that I've ever hallucinated for real in life. You know, I've never done psychedelics or anything like that. But I do remember asking the nurse and Shelby because I was really questioning what was happening. I remember like looking into the ceiling and being able to see words spelled out in like the ceiling tiles. I remember seeing things move, and then I would like question it. Dude, it was wild. And the thing I did know, because I was in so much pain, is I hadn't had, you know, any narcotics at that point. Because had I'd probably just been like, oh yeah, dude, I'm like pretty loopy right now. You know, like, I don't know if you've ever had, like even at the dentist, like nitrous or something like that. And they tell you you're going to feel loopy, and then you start to feel loopy and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, now I'm feeling it. Yeah. So it was like none of that, dude. I was really questioning what was going on because, yeah, I was hallucinating, right? And I didn't know this at the time until like I started talking to the nurse and describing it, and they're like, oh, let me get the doctor. And then they're like, oh yeah, dude, like that, an infection will do that. Like we think you have an infection. I think at that point they even said like, we think you have an infection. We're just trying to figure out, you know, and I'm sure there's a host of questions, but if that gives you at that point any idea of state of lucidness, I was not very.
That's insane. That's wild. I'm sure that was a really surreal experience. It still sounds like this entire timeline is really compressed, like so much happening in a very short period of time. When did things start to kind of calm down or get to a steady state where they're actually figuring out what is wrong and what are they going to do next?
I think, well, it didn't really get to a steady state until it was almost done, oddly enough, which was the final surgery. Because, you know, after I got into, like, I spent most of the time in the step down unit. So that's a majority of what I remember. But that was also like pretty much right before the first surgery. And so I spent a total of, I think it was like 9 nights, 10 days in the hospital, which was, that in of itself was a wild experience. Because, you know, even through like training and things that I've done, I think that is the longest I've ever gone without seeing the sun. Like, you know, and just think about in your life, like, have you ever not walked outside for that long? Like, no joke. And so like, I remember that was one of the first things I was grateful for, was like the sun shining down on me. So yeah, once I got down to the step down, or right before it, you know, they were trying to figure out. So they got the infectious disease doctor in there. He did some stuff, looked at some stuff, and he said, hey, I'm ordering these CAT scans, MRIs, whatever, all these things. I think you have necrotizing fasciitis. That's kind of the standard MO here. But he's like, we're going to find that out. And so then they went and had me do these CAT scans, these MRIs, had me come back up. And then I remember for some reason they had to send me back down. And that was one of the most challenging things that I've ever done in my life, because at that point, I don't even remember how they tested the bacteria. It could have been they did a surgery first. Like I kind of get things mixed up, but here's what I do remember. They put me in the CT scan, and you know, that was pretty easy. And then they had to do these MRIs. And I don't know if you've ever got one, but you know, these machines are, one of the first things they ask you is like, are you claustrophobic, right?
Claustrophobic, yep.
I'm not claustrophobic. You know, I've been put in some pretty small places and been tested. But I think as you get older, you sort of, you know, things can change.
Yeah.
Namely, when you're not putting yourself in those situations, which I really hadn't too much. I'd been laid up. And the The first time they put me in there, it was very, very uncomfortable. And I don't know, I went head first and I think I had my arm like this. And I think what it was they couldn't get the shot they wanted. But, they only tell you certain information.
Right.
And I was in so much pain and all I wanted were narcotics. Like I was actually asking for narcotics. And they're like, we can't yet for whatever reason. I don't know. They couldn't give me nothing. Not even like, what's it called? Like Valium to relax me or anything. Like literally nothing. And so they kind of like, pull the old bait and switch on me and they get it done. And I'm like, all right, whatever. And then they come up and tell me I got to do it again. And dude, I was so deflated. But what was worse was I still hadn't had narcotics. I'm in a ton of pain. And they get me down there and they're like, all right, we got to get you oriented like this. And they got me on my belly, face first, my arm up. And then my other arm had to be up as well. And I remember my whole body pretty much was in. I had this small little cavity that I could breathe. And so like, I'm kind of fighting this, like, I'm starting to get this like claustrophobic, like, oh dude, this is uncomfortable. Yeah. Plus my pain is through the roof. And I just remember them, and I should have known better, right? I would have done this to me. But I remember them telling me like, hey, 6 minutes. Like, that's all I need you for is 6 minutes. Like, you can do this. On the other side of this are the narcotics. We'll be able to start them. We'll get everything going, but we need you to do this. And dude, spoiler alert, it was not 6 minutes. And I just remember, like, I kept pushing to time. I was counting. So I was like, 1, 2, 3. And I remember counting, like, way past 6 minutes and just thinking, like, all right, let's do this one more time. I was counting in, like, sets of 100. I'm like, let's do this one more time. Let's do this one more time. And yeah, man, that really showed me, we always think that our bodies can go so far, but that was another instance where I learned that, like, you can always push farther. You can always push farther. And yeah, I in hindsight, how bad the situation, the reality of what it was, like, that aside, the fact that I was so beaten down, I was so broken, like, I had no clue what was going on. I was in a lot of pain, because at this point it had sunk in that things were not good for me. And when he said it was potentially necrotizing fasciitis, I don't know if I said it or my wife said it, but we were like, isn't that like fatal? And so immediately, what does he do? He goes to the plus side. He said, well, hey, here's the cool thing. He's like, because I'm an infectious disease doctor, I've seen this before, and I've seen a lot of people die, and I've seen a lot of people pull through. And he's like, the one thing you have in your favor is that you've got here so early. He's like, I think we have a really good job of catching this thing. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because he didn't want to, like, just go ham and, it's an escalation, right? They'll do like a debridement, then they'll do like start removing tissue, and then they'll start removing more, and then they'll actually get to like amputation. Like it escalates. Their biggest concern is it going for your heart? And that was the same for me, because it was the redness, which doesn't mean it was the infection, but like the redness was moving up. So they were like, man, is that infection traveling up, right? So anyways, they put me through that. And then at that point, and I don't think, I could be remembering this out of order. So part of the reason I was in so much pain, could have been a surgery before and then going back in the MRI. I don't think that was the case, because as far as I remember, I didn't have any narcotics prior to that experience, because I very vividly remember being like, that was like, I was already in a lot of pain, and that was just like the next level of uncomfortability, I mean, and when you think about it, it's like when you feel like going and running a mile, like, you're pretty close to that. Like, it's just a mile. It's not like mentally, like, it's not a small gap to close. It's not a large gap to close. Right. But like, if you like have the flu and you can't even like hold yourself up straight, the idea of running a mile is like a huge gap. Right. And so just thinking about that, like, that's the state I was in. Right. So it seems very, very small, but it's like, my body was shutting down, like, at this point, right? And so that's kind of partly why it felt like such a huge gap. And like I had, just ran a marathon or whatever, so to speak, like being able to get my mind and my body to like go through that second set of MRIs. Probably why it sticks out to me, But in either case. Yeah, man.
So it sounds like you were really getting pushed to the limits. I mean, was there a point where you thought, I can't do this anymore? Like, this is it, and then still push through it? Well, and what was that like?
Yeah, I actually, they put me in. So when they put me in the MRI the first time, they said like the whole 6 minutes thing. They pulled me out. They had to readjust me after a few minutes. And dude, I told them straight up, I was like, no. Like, I'm sure I probably didn't use the nicest words, but I was like, no, man, like I can't. And like, good on the techs for, I don't know, for whatever reason, they went to logic, which is how you have to speak to me. And they're like, hey, we want to help you, and the doctor needs this imaging. Because I think they were trying to make a major decision. And so they had also injected dyes and stuff in me. You know, they're poking me, prodding me. I got IVs in my arm, like, you know, and they're like, I remember them making me realize, like, this isn't an optional thing. Like, and so it was honestly at that point, I don't know why, maybe I thought it was optional, but the moment they got me to realize it wasn't optional, I was like, all right, I'm going to get through this one way or another. Like, might as well focus on not freaking out and just get it done, you know? But yeah, I absolutely wanted to quit. I mean, if they would have told me like, yeah, this is just a nice to have image, I'd have been like, no, dude, no.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the fact that it wasn't optional allowed you to push further than you thought you could.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So like that was the gist of all the, like the speed, right? Like, it was a mad dash to that first surgery. And then when they got that first one in, it was just a matter of how many more are we going to have to do to avoid, you know, removing this guy's arm or like removing some major things, right? Because, and I remember he told me, you know, he's like, I've had situations where he's like, I kid you not, this is the surgeon, right? So I mentioned I had 3 doctors. I actually had like 5 because I had 2 different surgeons as well. And I remember, because one of them specialized in like hand orthopedic stuff, and then one of them did something else. So I had to have 2 different ones. And I remember them telling me, he's like, I've actually done one of these before. I think I was his second necrotizing fasciitis surgery like this. But I remember him telling me he had done one before, and like, it was like they could see the tissue dying as he's like just trying to cut ahead of it. Like, no joke, it moves that fast. And so at the end of the day, that's one of the things that the infectious disease doctor like reiterated to me. He's like, which it seemed like a slow roll to us, but he had said, dude, speed. Like, if you would not have came when you did, like if they wouldn't have got you out of the ER in, you know, over to the hospital, like, well, who knows what would have happened. But he's like, that's what helped your case. Because here's the other thing. Like, I know I'm grateful that this happened. Like 100, there's not a piece of me that's like, I wish that wouldn't have happened or anything like that. Like, I'm so grateful because I only see good things that have came from this. I'm also extremely blessed because, you know, yeah, it's only been a year, but there's also lifelong complications. Like, generally speaking, it leaves your body in a state where, you know, for the rest of your life, your immune system's compromised, right? And so it's not atypical for people who've got necrotizing fasciitis to like once a year get some or other sort of infection. Maybe not necrotizing fasciitis again, yeah, but like, you know, some other form, just because their body's like way more susceptible now. I haven't experienced anything like that so far. There was a huge concern with the mobility of my arm initially because the way they had to cut and, you know, remove things and, yeah, whatever. But I mean, I feel pretty decent. You know, it's tight. It feels a little different, but yeah, like I can do normal people things. So yeah, man, I'm extremely grateful for the way that it turned out on that front, for sure.
It's amazing. I mean, so this is, I mean, obviously very traumatic, very painful for you to go through it. What was it like for your wife, Shelby? And did you tell your kids, or did Shelby tell your kids what was happening and when?
Man, in terms of like my kids knowing and everything like that, they knew, you know, something was up with that, but we didn't give them like details and stuff like that. And I think, you know, as you do as a parent, you want to protect your kids. And, you know, yeah, they came to the hospital, they saw me, I got to spend time with them. But, my wife, she Man, she did awesome. She did really good. I was actually talking to her about this morning, and she was telling me, I was like, what was like probably the biggest realization, because you have a life altering experience like this, and it changed the way I see some things, and I learned some valuable lessons, and then the more that I looked for them, the more that I saw them, because I have these moments where I remember thinking these things that sort of changed things in my life. And I also remember afterwards, like reflecting, I remember just talking to Shelby about it and being like, that was wild, huh? And then we just kind of, as you do, communicate and talk about it. So I was like, what was like the biggest thing for you? Like, what was like probably something that really changed the way you see life? And she told me this morning, like, she didn't even think about it twice. She's like, oh, no one's coming to save you. Like, life can change in an instant and nobody cares but you. If you know my wife, she's not like a pessimist. She loves people. She didn't mean this in a negative way, but like as I dug in and I started asking her about it, she's like, dude, so we didn't even mention what else was going on in my life. But so I just got done healing from this hip surgery. My wife was pregnant, and so we're getting ready to have a baby. She doesn't know if I'm going to make it or not because she's like kind of afraid to ask the question, but they're like telling her like, hey, we got to move fast. Like, we need your husband to cooperate with us. We need you to cooperate with us. Like, so she's kind of getting the like, oh, this is like really serious. And, she's watching me poop on myself and like all this stuff. And I remember her saying like, I remember thinking like, oh, dang, like, I'm alone after this if like this doesn't go well, because the hope and the reassurance was like, oh, but we're going to get in there for the surgery. We don't know how it's going to go, but we think that we can get ahead of this thing. And that's really the name of the game. Like, they were kind of like, let's just focus on what needs to happen. Like, don't worry about that. Yes, there's risks. Don't worry about that. Right. Which like, and I remember her saying like, dude, I love all the people that reached out. There were so many people that reached out, but she's like, people would reach out and then move on with their life. And she's like, my life was at a standstill. Like, we had our businesses were running, she had to cover down on some things for me. She had to have some conversations with me, like at a timing where she didn't want to have them. And she had to take some things over. She had to get our kids to school. Thank God for our family. She reached out to her family. She reached out to my mom. My mom literally dropped everything she had going on, as I think most mothers would, and flew out to help. And like, honestly, my mom spent a lot of time with me so that Shelby could sort of like take care of things, because again, like I said, like, like 9 days, whatever it was, like, I'm just sitting in the hospital in and out of surgery. Like, they're monitoring me, they're pumping antibiotics, right? So my whole body, I'm still on narcotics at this point because the pain is still really bad. Plus now you got pain from the surgery because they're cutting into my body and all that stuff. And yeah, man, she's just like, just this feeling of like, dude, like, our family really is all we have. The people that cared the most, people in that room, my mom, Shelby, both our boys, and me. And like, other people sent their regards, but that was it, dude, and yeah, I think that was the huge thing for her. And so there was this boldness in her that's like, dude, yeah, we got what we got. It is truly on us. And I think it sort of empowerment came from it.
This is such an interesting lesson. It's something I don't think you ever think about unless you're in that situation. I mean, right. Myself growing up, my parents always taught me and my siblings, like, you guys, like one day, my dad would say, your mom and I, we're not going to be here. And you guys are all you have, like your siblings, and, you'll have your families, but that's it. And so those relationships are just incredibly important. And now you having gone through this and really seen that, and actually seeing, the way that the world reacts to your situation or doesn't, now you have something really concrete you can pass on to your kids, that lesson, and yeah. Like, hey, you guys are it,
Yeah.
This is how you need to kind of pull together.
Oh man, yeah, that's absolutely.
Gift. A real gift.
Yeah, it was. And, at the same time, the other thing that was really cool was, again, if you know my wife, this isn't coming from a place of like pessimism. At the same time, a huge lesson for me was reaffirming how important loving people and relationships and community is, and I believe that to be biblical. If you're familiar with the Bible, the greatest commandment is to love your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your might. Second greatest is to love your neighbor, but it's love your neighbor as yourself. So what do I hear there? Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. And that was just reaffirmed throughout the whole thing because, you know, I'm huge on maximizing your time. And part of that is by being selective on what you focus on, the activities, priorities, so on and so forth. And for me, the easiest way to do that is to just like remove as much stuff as possible. And in that moment, everything, like business had been removed. I don't know where my phone was for days. Like everything was removed. And, you know, if I wasn't intentional, there's no way I wasn't going to be in the moment. And like being in the moment right there made me realize like, wow, there's only a few things that I truly can affect. And how I love people and how I choose to accept love from them is something I can affect and is something I can control. And I'm a fan of controlling the things you can't control. So that was another big one for me, you know, like at the same time, like, because I'm right there, you know, when I'm supporting somebody going through something, it's like, yeah, my day's going to be the same as usual. How can I support you? And it is kind of this odd thing because for them, time is kind of standing still as they're going through whatever they're going through, whether that's, you know, a death or, you know, a significant injury or whatever, you know, similar to like what Shelby said. She's like, my world stopped and nobody else's did, you know. It's wild. It's
crazy. Yeah. I mean, so you talked about control and what you can control, how you love others and how you accept love from them. But generally, what did this experience give you, or how did it impact your sense of control in, you know, more broadly in life?
Man, that's a great question. I think it was a reminder. You know, you hear a lot of people within our space, like entrepreneur self-development space is very, very closely related, right? So control the things you can control, let go of the rest, right? Like, and that really is good advice. Like, it really is. But I think sometimes we have a misunderstanding of what we can control. Like that is the problem. Like we kind of think we can control things that we actually can't. And so for me, it put things into perspective. Like immediately I was like, I cannot control the outcome of my health, but I can control the inputs, if that makes sense. So like I couldn't control moving forward in the future. I can't control if I get an infection and die. But what I can control is where I place myself and what I put into my body to combat that infection and all those sorts of things. So it sort of kind of like highlighted, like, you know, fortunately, I've had some things happen to me in life, you know, that have humbled me. You know, there's this stereotype that like my type of person thinks he's invincible, right? I don't necessarily. Like, I remember eating an explosion and being like, oh, I remember getting knocked out and being like, wow, I really cannot control this dirt bike like I thought. This was a little different. This was more like a slower, drawn out process. And it really highlighted the importance of health. Like health equals me staying here with my kids, equals me being able to support my wife so she doesn't feel alone. Like I could go down a rabbit trail with that. And so I can't control the outcome, but what I can control is how I steward this body, how I take care of it. And so it changed some things, you know, like for instance, I used to, you know, like some of the houses, as you know, we buy are in pretty bad condition, right? And I used to almost like in a jokingly way, like, oh, how bad's this crawl space going to be, you know? And like I'd put myself in these crazy situations because if you could get in there and get down to the details, and you could give theoretically the customer a better offer. And so that was like always what I would say. I'd just be like, listen, we got to get down there to see how bad it really is so we can give them a good offer, because I don't want to give them an offer where I'm like, well, if the inspector comes back and it's this bad, it's going to be this. If it's not this bad, it's going to be this. I hated that. But I sort of like kind of like played on it, and I don't do that anymore. Like now I'm like, hey, no, like there's some real serious dangers here with this thing. And that's just one example, right? But I mean, the way that I live my life now, still take risk, but it just sort of, I think about it a little more, you know, put a little more thought into it.
That's really interesting. So it didn't just affect your sense of control, and we can, I think, spend another easy half hour talking about control and controlling your controllables, but also it seems like it impacted your risk tolerance and especially related to physical risk. So there's like risk tolerance when it comes to business, financial risk. Do I place bets on things? But physical risk is something different.
Yeah, absolutely. It made me think about, we're here. I'm here to take risks. We're all here to take risks. You don't take risk, there's no opportunity to win.
Yeah.
Right. So, and the more risk, more reward as it goes. So I'm a fan of taking risks, like absolutely take risks and then figure out how you're going to mitigate that risk. Right. And that very much aligns with how I was brought up as a professional, as a Green Beret. Right. But it was more so like, let's go to the starting point and decide if the risk is even worth doing to begin with. Right. We don't take risks just to take risk. Right. So like if I knew that there was any sort of possibility, hindsight being 20/20, of me let's say I got this because I stepped into that water, right? I didn't want to put my family through this. I don't regret the situation, but I put a lot of people through stuff. My wife, her life suddenly changed. My mom flew out here, But like, had I known that, right? I would have said, is the risk of getting in the water with my kids worth the potential outcome? And like, no, I would have just sat there. If I even knew that those two were connected, right? In hindsight. Now, had I been there and never having necrotizing fasciitis, I probably would have said, yeah, dude, live in the moment. Like, that's just kind of how, I hope that makes sense. But so it's not so much how I think about risk, but what it's shaped is like, well, let's decide if the risk is even worth taking to begin with. Right? Which seems pretty obvious, but isn't something I had done up to that point. I just sort of assumed if it was a risk, it was a risk worth taking. You know what I'm saying?
This is really interesting, and this is an aside, and I don't know, like maybe we'll keep this in the podcast episode that you publish or not, but just the whole notion of talking about risk and risk adjusted rewards, and that's a whole other topic that we could talk about.
Yeah, dude, we could go deep in that.
And you have real world experience with taking physical risk, from your time in the military as a Green Beret.
Yeah.
So I think that could be something really interesting to explore. If that's something you even, I don't know if you could talk about. I know this, certain things you can and can't.
Yeah.
But okay, so that's really interesting. I feel like we covered a lot of stuff. So Devin, I really want to know, you talked a little bit about your faith a few times today, right? And the first time you talked about it was when you were describing at the beginning of the journey when you were praying that morning. And I found that was interesting. I'm curious, were you praying? Was that just part of your morning routine to pray and that's what you were doing? Or was it already related to the pain that you were experiencing?
Yeah, so this is how I remember it. So, man, I've grown in my faith over the years. Praying is a routine thing that I do in the morning. So it's kind of something that's there, that's going to happen at a point. That wasn't the point for it to happen. That was more so, which, just being transparent. We get into the hustle and bustle of every day, and that's like any other relationship. It can be easily overlooked. And I was just kind of like, I can pray about this. And I just remember, like, I wanted relief. At the same time, I was sort of like succumbing to the pain. I was overwhelmed. And I don't know how to explain it to you because it even right now kind of sounds funny, but it draws up some emotion. Like, I know it's a real thing that was there. I remember like still being coherent, being like, dude, what is going on? Like, why do I feel this way? And it was just the weirdest thing. Like, how can you feel like the inkling of making such a life-changing decision and feeling a certain way, and then at the same time be making a judgment on that thing? And it is just, man, it was really weird. And so that's kind of the state I was in that sense of praying. And I was just like, I need some relief, give me some comfort, like, give me some answers. Like, I'm the problem solving type. So I'm immediately looking for answers, right? Like, whatever it is, I'm looking for data, things like that. So yeah.
And not to dwell on it too much, but it sounds like the prayer came after, but you went from waking up at 4:30 in the morning thinking maybe you slept the wrong way, and that was the cause of the pain, to the pain being so bad that you wanted to die.
Yep.
And so that, I think that's...
It throws you off. Yeah, because like you said, it happened fast. Like, and it was getting progressively worse. That was kind of the thing too, right? It wasn't just like a sustained, steady pain. It was like like as I'm like getting more and more awareness, like the pain is increasing. So I'm like sort of like losing awareness at the same time. Like, what is going on? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So thinking about the broader journey here, what has this experience, how has that impacted your faith generally, and was it in a more positive direction, negative direction?
I'm grateful for moments like this. Like I said, I don't want to go through that again, but like having been through it, being on the other side, it's another one of those moments that's sort of a testament, and it's not clear during that time. I didn't really go too much into why me, like not that I haven't before, but I just didn't have time for that. So sort of my perspective now has just been like, man, look at all the good that came from something like this, and sort of put the bad aside. And so it's strengthened my faith. It's another one of those things. It's like, yeah, like I don't know why I went through it, but like, there's a couple in thinking about this, there's a couple big lessons that had come to mind. And honestly, I don't really see anything else that would have showed me those lessons had I not gone through this. There's this big one on the way I view regret, which actually played into my life a little bit later. But, regret's one of those things now that I sort of tie to failure. Like it's very similar, right? Like some people can view it as a bad thing. Some people can view it as a good thing. Most people view it as a bad thing, right? Same with failure. And what I realized is, then I'll talk about why regret here in a minute. But what I realized about regret is, regret's a thing that you can choose to feel or not to feel, regardless of your situation. The situation doesn't change. And so like it can go away in an instance. And it's the same for failure. Like, as the saying goes, it's growing more popular nowadays. Like you only fail once you quit, right? And it's true. Like failure is necessary for growth. Well, regret is necessary thing that you feel to get your attention, to change your behavior and change your actions. And it only really truly is regret if you don't change, right? And so like, if you think about anything that you've done in life, or like, I regret making that decision. It's like, well, maybe you did, but did you change your behavior? It's like, well, yeah, that decision did change my behavior. Okay, so do you regret that thing happened to you? No, actually that was a good thing, right? So that's sort of how I felt. And really, there was this moment where I started realizing, like, I think it was a little bit after the hallucinations, like how bad this was. And I didn't no longer have this assumption that they were going to figure it out or I was going to be okay. Like I was like, oh, this is bad. And I remember thinking, dude, I screwed Shelby. And the reason was because, first and foremost, I didn't have a way. Like finance is a necessary part of survival. Like it just is, right? We could get into how that's biblical too, but like it is. I had no way to take care of Shelby. Like we had businesses, my income would end. She would have gotten something from the military, $400,000, maybe get her through, I don't know, a couple years, but it's all on her. I did nothing to set her up at this point in my life. I have since changed all of that because of this instance, because of those thoughts, and I was like, holy crap, it was so real to me. But I remember regretting, I was like, dude, because I don't know what happens after this, like that feeling. Like I've never had one of those experiences where I've died and come back. I know what my faith says and I know what I feel, right? And how I think and what my beliefs are. And all those say, it ain't gonna matter to me once I'm gone. And I just remember feeling really, really selfish and really like, oh dude, I messed up. And so, I could have stayed on that and I could have, I don't know, maybe I could have carried that, but I just changed it. I've had other experiences. I know maybe you have, several people have. I think it's just become one of those things where I've sort of shifted how I feel about it. And it's like, man, it's only regret if I don't change. Like it doesn't have to stay that way.
Yeah, for sure. So it strengthened your faith. And can you tell me in any practical terms how it has strengthened your faith? And like what is it, how has it impacted your life and how you show up for your family and your community?
Yeah. Well, I think and this is just one of the experiences. I think everybody's life is different. We all have different experiences. But this was one more to add to sort of our time is finite. It's going to keep moving whether we are or not. And I sort of lean back on what I feel I'm called to do, what I feel my mission is, and putting my all into that while like just embracing the journey along the way. And it's more or less reaffirmed some things.
What has it reaffirmed?
Well, at the end of the day, I'm going to be gone. And, I'm going to, like, some people believe in legacy. Some people don't believe in legacy. But what I feel like I can affect and I'm going to be left with is I was given a certain ability. I was given certain resources. I was given certain situations, right? Whatever you want to call that, whatever you want to label that. And I can choose to maximize that. I can choose not to maximize that. When I'm going to be judged, what I'm going to be judged on is how well I did with that. And so, does that make sense? Am I articulating that the right way, in a way that makes sense to you?
It sounds like you're talking about stewardship.
Yeah. And it helped. This is one of those events that's helped me really sort of, I don't want to say like find myself, but understand who I am and what I'm about, if that makes sense. I remember, we all go on this journey of life, and we all go on a search at some point. Viktor Frankl has a real amazing book called Man's Search for Meaning. I would encourage anybody that's going through this is just sort of feels like they're dawdling and wandering through life to check it out. But I've gone through a few different ones in at varying degrees, right? The earliest I remember, I was completely lost, had no clue. And as I've gone through those, it's sort of progressed to me figuring out like who I am at my core, and that has helped me work through it, right? Like, for instance, what did I care about in that moment, right? I cared about my loved ones. I cared about my health. I cared about how we spent our time together in that room and how we worked together to solve this problem. Problem being my infection. Is finance where the business is still moving? Yes. Is finance important? Yes. Is wealth important? Yes. But more than that, because again, I could only care about so many things, right? More than that, I still cared about the people in our company. I still cared about the employees. I still cared about our mission and our vision. We had some important events coming up, but I didn't care about having sales calls. I didn't care about, I didn't care about those things. Like the vision, the mission, everything that I'd set before that, I still cared about those things. It's not I didn't care about the business. I only cared about my health. I still cared about those things. But those are the things I cared about. Like, it's like the heart of it, right? Like, don't make a mistake. Don't make any assumption that I don't care about a business being a business. A business has to make money, 100%. But like, I'm doing it for a greater reason than that. And like, when I sort of like work through that, it gets down to like this whole stewardship thing that you just mentioned. And it's like, well, why? Because I feel like that's what God's called me to do. He's equipped me, and I need to go out there and maximize these things. And I'm cool with that. I'm sort of leaning into it now, more so. Again, probably partially because of an event like this.
I mean, so you've used the word called a couple of times. I'm writing notes, and you talked about the mission. I've also noticed you've been talking about boldness recently.
Yeah.
So about it. How has this ordeal contributed to the focus on boldness? And what does boldness mean to you? And how are you being more bold now?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I don't know that I've really thought about that too much, like how this specific event has contributed to me being more bold. But I suppose one thing it has done is it is reaffirmed my belief that we assume that everything we does matters to everybody. And there's a lot of struggle with like trying to convince yourself. This is what I see. This is what I've experienced. Okay. There's a lot of struggle with trying to convince yourself that like, it's okay that it matters to other people, but what they think doesn't matter. And I think that doesn't matter at all. Like, really, it only matters at the end of the day what people think of you the actions you do take, you don't take, whether you're successful, whether you fail, whether you look silly, whether you look funny, like it really only matters to two people. And for me, that's me and God. And so if I'm called to do something and I don't do it, the person I've grown into, like I'm going to feel some sort of way about that. And I believe my God is going to feel some sort of way about that. And if that can become my focus, I don't have to sit here and debate about whether it's okay if people think some sort of way about this thing or that thing, or they think it's cool or it's not cool, or they laugh at me or they like it or they understand or they don't understand. And so I think that's what boldness has become to me. And this is probably another one of those instances where it's sort of shaped that, but it's happened over time. I didn't just wake up one day feeling this sort of way. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Devin, I think on that note, on the note of boldness and how your thought process around it is evolving, I think this is probably a good stopping point for us.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing the story. I mean, I got a page full of notes myself of things that are takeaways for me from this conversation. I think they're going to help the audience a lot. And yeah, I appreciate you sharing it. And I'm glad I finally got to learn like what the heck happened to you. I thought it was 6 months ago. It was over a year ago. It's incredible how long, how fast time flies. But yeah, I really, really appreciate the story. I think it's going to be really helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, I hope so. And thanks, Ron. I appreciate you jumping on with me on this. And you have some really good questions. One thing that, I don't know, I maybe touched on this a little bit, but I didn't highlight too much. But tactically speaking, big picture, what this event did do for me was like, everybody's at a different place in their business. Maybe you're doing, let's talk in terms of revenue, right? To identify where you may or may not be. Maybe you're doing 5 figures, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? You kind of plan accordingly in all areas of the business, right? You're not going to have a 9-figure plan for a 5-figure business until it's appropriate. So I'm not saying everybody should have this elaborate plan of succession, like all these sorts of things, but at least think about it and have some sort of like what's going to happen with the business, right? If you are the key man and you are wearing 4 or 5 hats and you have one employee right now, have you thought about what is going to happen if something happens to you, right? Like you can write up a simple 5-step plan. You need to call this person, do this thing. Here's where the passwords are. Here's how to wind down the business. You need to sell off assets. You need to call this attorney, like whatever it is. There's so many different ways of doing it. But like my encouragement would just be like, think about it. Because that is something that I was like, was a true blind spot. Thinking about it first is going to allow you to put the most basic thing together and at least have something so you're not at a standstill. And then the other part of that is just, planning for overall, like financially, what if something happens to you? What are you going to do if you have dependents? Like, what are they going to do? This completely changed. This moved me to do some things I knew I should have been doing, but this also changed the way I thought about things and the way I thought about, how things are handled if something happens to me. I've had several people, I've lost some really close people to me. I've watched people lose close people to them. When we're buying houses, I work with people that are going through some really crazy things. And actually, I've even had some really good conversations with my friend who's a funeral director. And all these conversations revolve around how challenging things can be when somebody who owns things is no longer here, whether that's a spouse who's not on accounts and can't access money just because of the way forms were signed, to not really understanding where things are. And they're sort of in a place where you might think everybody would know they are, or they should be, but like nobody knows. Simple things like that. So anyway, that was one thing that I wanted to make sure I left, because that was something that changed the way that I operate in that sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on that. I'm sure a lot of people need to take a lot more steps in that regard, including myself. So it's a good reminder for me too.
Yes, sir. Well, all right. Well, on that note, let's wrap it up. Ron, thank you so much for coming on with me and sharing in this conversation. Until next time, we'll see you.
Peace.